for Pope Francis, tonight on Global National. The Vatican says he'll be in hospital for days, maybe even weeks. The new details about the pontiff's medical condition as the faithful gather to show support. Russia's drone attacks on Kyiv ahead of the third anniversary of the war. We'll tell you about the high-stakes compromise Ukraine's president is willing to make. The major gains made by a far-right party in Germany's election.
A lot of things are at stake in this election.
How much control will it have in Europe's largest country? Plus,
it's been phenomenal. I can't get over just the lifestyle here, the weather.
Move aside Florida or California. Canadians are exploring destinations beyond the U.S.
Global National, reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with the health of Pope Francis, who is spending another night in a Rome hospital. The pontiff is suffering from a complex lung infection and what the Vatican describes as mild kidney failure. Still, his condition has not significantly worsened. Watching it all is our Jeff Semple, who's in Rome for us tonight. Jeff?
Well, Nithu, for the first time in his papacy, Pope Francis missed Sunday prayers for the second consecutive week. But tonight, the Vatican released an update on his condition, saying he remains critical but stable. Some much-needed good news for his followers, many of whom feared he wouldn't make it through the night.
On this Sunday morning, Catholics held Mass outside a hospital. All night and day, they held vigil, praying and waiting for news of their Pope on the other side of that 10th-story window, fighting for his life. I came here from Mexico with a prayer, asking God that everything goes well for him, Alejandra Perez Martel told Global News. Rosemary Uday came from Nigeria.
How are you feeling about it?
Actually, it's I didn't feel good that Holy Father is sick, because he's sick now. The whole church is like staying quiet, praying, hoping.
The Pope's personal popularity in parts of Africa and Latin America has helped fuel a 10% rise in the number of Catholics during his papacy. And far and wide, they prayed for the pontiff to pull through, including in his hometown of Buenos Aires. The People's Pope has forged a reputation for placing compassion and inclusion over doctrine, and even at 88, for his relentless work ethic. The Pope had added events to his already packed schedule this year, which celebrates the Church's Jubilee. Seen here struggling to breathe during Mass earlier this month. Days later, he was admitted to hospital with bronchitis, which developed into double pneumonia, and Saturday turned into a prolonged asthmatic respiratory crisis.
For the last several weeks, he's not been well, but he keeps pushing it. And this has frustrated, I think, some of his aides because he will not slow down.
But now he may have to, says this veteran Vatican expert.
Let's posit that he pulls through this crisis. He is not going to be the same man when he comes back here to the Vatican.
Already there is debate over whether Pope Francis should resign if he's unable to fulfill his duties.
No organisation likes uncertainty, and if people are, of course, talking about the future, that's inevitable. The Pope, by the way, knows that. I mean, he jokes that every time he coughs, that there's an air of a conclave already.
Over the weekend, the Vatican took the rare step of publicly denouncing those rumors of a pending resignation. And Pope Francis himself released a written statement today thanking his supporters. And the man who leads the church in prayer also asked the church to pray for him. Nithu?
All right, Jeff Semple in Rome tonight. Thanks, Jeff. Projections based on early results in Germany show the center-right Christian Democratic Union Party will come out on top in today's snap federal election with almost 30% of the vote. The conservative leader is poised to become the new German chancellor.
Weil CDU und CSU gut gearbeitet haben und wir uns sehr, sehr gut vorbereitet.
Friedrich Merz said today under his leadership, a new government will be formed quickly because Germany needs to be present in Europe again. The far-right AfD party has made huge gains, doubling its support. It's projected to become the main opposition, winning a record 20% of the vote. Exit polls suggest the voter turnout reached the highest level in decades at 84%. Our Redmond Shannon is in Berlin and joins us from outside the Reichstag, where Germany's federal parliament sits. Redmond, if the AfD becomes the second biggest political force, how will that shape politics in Germany?
Tonight, the AfD leader Alice Weidel says her party is now ready for government. The election winner, Friedrich Merz, says any coalition government that he forms will not involve the AfD.
So wird es ab morgen nicht weitergehen.
In the hours before Sunday's vote, an MP with the Anti-Immigration Alternative for Deutschland, or AfD, says their party is the only one that can solve Germany's problems. Listing a string of recent violent attacks where the suspects were foreign-born.
We are talking about extremists and criminals who should not stay in our country.
Ronald Glaser expects to be among the new wave of AfD lawmakers in the Bundestag, but who know they won't be in government because of the so-called firewall, a pact between all other parties to keep the far right out of power in Germany.
We represent millions of German voters, and we cannot be excluded from the process of building up a government.
This AfD rally is surrounded on both sides by one counter-protest over there and another very noisy one over here.
One regional court labelled the AfD a suspected extremist group, but its supporters called the firewall unfair.
I mean, it's a stupidity. I think it's not democratical.
And they're not alone.
The voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls.
What J.D. Vance did was showing that he has no clue about Germany.
Clara Bunge is an MP with the far-left Die Linke party. She fears the firewall is cracking. The man now likely to be the next chancellor, Friedrich Merz, controversially got the support of the AfD in an opposition immigration motion last month.
He was normalizing the far right and their ideas in our parliament. And this threatens the democracy in our country.
The firewall, called both a protector of democracy
Make Meinungsfreiheit great again.
And a threat to democracy. This election is unlikely to resolve that debate. Merz says he hopes to form a government by Easter. It is likely that will involve teaming up with the Social Democrats of outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Merz says one of his priorities as Chancellor will be to make Europe stronger and more independent of the United States when it comes to defence. Neetu?
All right, Redmond Shannon in Berlin tonight. Thanks, Redmond. As the world marks the third anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is expected to arrive in the besieged country for a summit of world leaders. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy confirmed the meeting, which comes as the U.S. signals a shift in its support for Kyiv. Amandalina Letterio reports.
Russia unleashing its biggest drone attack on Kyiv since the start of the war, a day before the third anniversary of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine says most were shot down, electronically jammed, or disappeared from radar. Hours later, Ukraine's leader, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, saying he's willing to give up his presidency for peace. Adding he'd even step down for a NATO membership. On Sunday, people rallying across Canada sharing that same hope. Russia's invasion of Ukraine started on February 24th, 2022. Since then, Canada has welcomed more than 220,000 Ukrainians to work, live, and study until it is safe for them to go home.
I feel sad because that's already the third year of full-scale invasion. I just want it to be done. I want a victory for my country, and I want every Ukrainian to live in a safe place.
To me, the assignment was trust building.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East talking to CBS on Sunday about President Donald Trump's efforts to make a deal to end the war. It comes shortly after meeting with Vladimir Putin for several hours in Saudi Arabia.
Obviously, there would be an expectation that if we get to a peace deal, that you would be able to have American companies come back and do business there. And I think that everybody would believe that that would be a positive, good thing to happen.
Witkoff also claiming a deal with Ukraine, mineral rights for security guarantees, could come by midweek. European leaders have been shut out of those talks.
There can be no discussion about Ukraine without Ukraine.
France's president poised to travel to Washington over the coming week to make the case for broader involvement. But until a peace deal is reached, war rages on. Amandalina Letterio, Global News, Toronto.
In Lebanon, hundreds of thousands of people gathered for the funeral of Hezbollah's former leader. Supporters from several countries filled a stadium in the Hezbollah-controlled southern suburbs of Beirut. It's the region where Hassan Nasrallah was killed in an Israeli airstrike in September. He was one of Hezbollah's founders and led the militant group for more than 30 years. Nasrallah's killing significantly weakened the Iran-backed militant group before it agreed to a ceasefire with Israel. Israel and Hamas are accusing each other of violating the fragile Gaza ceasefire. Israel delayed the previously agreed upon release of more than 600 Palestinian prisoners. Israel says it's in response to Hamas parading the coffins of 4 deceased hostages through Gaza. Candice Cole reports.
For the first time in over 2 decades, Israel has deployed tanks to the northern part of the West Bank and Gaza on Sunday. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the military to carry out an intensive operation in the region following a series of bus explosions in Tel Aviv Thursday. Israel's defense minister Israel Katz said some 40,000 Palestinian refugees had already fled the area. The move comes after Israel delayed the release of 620 Palestinian prisoners who were set to be handed over in exchange for the 6 Israeli hostages Hamas released Saturday, part of Phase 1 of the ceasefire agreement that went into effect January 19th.
Since the early stages, we were afraid that Israel will not stick to this deal. Yesterday, what Israel did is not acceptable by the mediators.
In a statement, Netanyahu's office says it's waiting to release the Palestinian detainees until Hamas agrees to stop the, quote, humiliating ceremonies forcing hostages to appear on stage before being handed over to their families. While the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas remains fragile at best, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, says he's confident the two sides will reach Phase 2 of the ceasefire agreement as he spoke of securing the release of Idan Alexander, the last remaining Israeli American being held by Hamas.
The Phase 2 negotiation is much about 2 things. A permanent ceasefire, a cessation of all violence, and in addition to that, the fact that Hamas cannot be allowed to come back into the government.
Senator Chris Van Hollen says getting to Phase 2 is a good thing. However,
he did not disavow this outrageous idea that Donald Trump put on the table of cleaning out 2 million Gazans. That is ethnic cleansing by another name.
earlier this month, U.S. President Donald Trump floated plans to turn Gaza into a Riviera of the Middle East, effectively driving Palestinians out of Gaza. Human rights groups have warned such a plan could be considered a war crime. Neetu?
All right, Candice Cole in Washington. Thanks very much, Candice. Demands for answers coming up. Why the release of an activist in the U.S. is painful for a family in Nova Scotia. After spending almost 50 years in prison, a prominent Native American activist is back at his home in North Dakota tonight. Leonard Peltier was convicted in the 1975 homicide of 2 FBI agents. Last month, former U.S. President Joe Biden commuted Peltier's life sentence to house arrest. But while he's being celebrated south of the border, feelings in Canada are much more complicated because of his history with a group connected to the murder of a Mi'kmaq woman decades ago. Heidi Petracek speaks with that woman's daughters about her push for Peltier to answer questions about the case.
It was a hero's welcome in North Dakota for Native American activist Leonard Peltier. Freed after almost 50 years in prison, Peltier always said he was innocent in the 1975 killing of 2 FBI agents, back when he was a prominent member of the American Indian movement. Advocates long maintained he was wrongfully convicted, and after years of freedom campaigns, the 80-year-old's life sentence was commuted to house arrest on the last day of Joe Biden's presidency.
It's a lot better in a cell.
But in Nova Scotia, Denise Pictou-Maloney has no reason to celebrate.
There was no justice in this. It was a political move.
In the 1970s, Maloney's mother, Anna May Pictou-Akwash, was also part of the American Indian movement known as AIM. In 1975, the 30-year-old was suspected of being an FBI informant and was shot in the back of the head in South Dakota. 2 AIM members were convicted of her murder.
Part of the reason why the secret about what actually happened to Anna May has been such a well-kept secret is that you just not had a handful of people, but you had a community, some who were involved in multiple murders of other informants within the American Indian movement.
Peltier has never been charged or accused by authorities of being involved in her death. But because he was a prominent AIM leader at the time, her family and their supporters feel he knows more than he's let on. Pictou-Maloney feels betrayed by Indigenous groups who supported Peltier's release.
If you are advocating for violent men, at the same time you're advocating for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, that's not, to me, justice.
In a statement to Global News, his lawyer says Peltier was not involved, nor does he hold knowledge regarding the tragic death of Anna May Akwash. Insisting Mr. Peltier must be implicated will not engender a meaningful measure of justice. Pictou-Maloney says learning more about what happened to her mother and why would help her find the closure she still seeks. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
Ahead, taking your destinations and your dollar a little further. The lengths some Canadians are going to bypass the U.S. It's not every day you see a huge passenger plane accompanied by a fighter jet mid-flight, but that's what happened today after what authorities later determined was a non-credible threat made against the Delhi-bound American Airlines flight from New York. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner, with about 200 passengers, diverted safely to Rome, where it was cleared to depart to its final destination on Monday. The threat of U.S. tariffs is steering some Canadians away from traveling south of the border. As Ann Gaviola tells us, many are opting to spend their dollars in different destinations.
Lauren Hancock says she's having the time of her life in Australia.
It's been phenomenal. I can't get over just the lifestyle here, the weather. The city is beautiful. It feels very safe.
The 20-year-old landed in Sydney last month for an internship. She's part of a wave of Canadians looking at far-flung destinations for work and travel.
More Canadians are looking towards even further destinations like Japan, Korea, and Australia.
A trend created by strained relations with the U.S. amid tariff uncertainty.
They've chosen to either cancel, rebook, and also just pause their bookings towards the U.S. right now.
WestJet has seen a 25% drop in bookings to the U.S. in recent weeks, and Air Canada is ready to reduce flights to America starting in March if needed. The number of flights to Australia, on the other hand, have been expanded because of an agreement between the two countries announced late last year.
We have daily flights from Qantas, our national carrier, but also Air Canada is servicing Brisbane and Sydney as well. Connectivity between our countries has never been better.
Another factor driving Canadians from the U.S., our loonie, currently at 4-year lows against the American dollar. Less of a problem in countries with currencies close to par.
When you're booking for your car hire, your accommodation, excursions, you're not going to have that sticker shock because there's no currency exchange. It's essentially dollar for dollar.
Visiting during shoulder season can provide better value too. Ann Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
El restaurante Alma in Montreal, Canada.
Next, the Canadian restaurant winning accolades in Mexico. If you're a fan of Mexican cuisine, the best destination outside of Mexico itself might be here in Canada. A Montreal restaurant has won a major gastronomy award. Dan Spector reports.
You may think of corn tortillas as something simple, but to Juan Lopez Luna,
They're a labor of love, a symbol of the respect he has for his culture and his family.
It takes about 12 hours, the whole process.
It starts with the corn sourced from small farms in Mexico, some of which are near where he grew up in the state of Tlaxcala. It's soaked overnight, grinded up, then pressed using this machine Lopez Luna got from his grandmother.
You can see it's all like bended. It's like made many tortillas.
Once the tortilla puffs up on this hot clay cooking surface, it's ready.
And you know, in Mexico they say once you can do that, like that the tortilla puffs, you can get married.
The chef puts this level of precision and care into all the meticulously crafted items on his menu at Alma in Outremont. The place does very well, but he was just recognized for his work in a way that totally took him aback.
It's extremely honor and proud moment.
El restaurante Alma in Montreal, Canada.
At the prestigious Culinaria Mexicana Gala in Oaxaca, Mexico, Alma was named the best Mexican restaurant in the world outside of Mexico by a panel of dozens of voters.
The first row was all the OGs of chefs of Mexico, you know, and when I saw that, I think it's when I got really nervous.
Lopez Luna blends local Quebec ingredients with Mexican tradition to create delectable offerings. This Quebec duck is adorned with mole sauce that takes 2 days to make, using a technique he learned from his aunt.
She was famous making mole around the towns where I grew up.
Lopez Luna admits after winning the award he feels extra pressure to honor his country and its illustrious culinary history with every plate. But he knows generations of family tradition will help him shoulder that burden. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
That is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is Little Ants, Nova Scotia. Thanks for watching.